Well, here we are on Wednesday, July 26th, and we're happy to have rejoined the podcast Sean Forman, the founder of Baseball Reference and now Sports Reference. And today's a big day because they launched, they bought Immaculate Grid a couple of weeks ago, and today they're releasing everything at 9 o'clock, which I think we already discussed is probably getting people a little cheesed off. But Sean, welcome to the podcast. We're happy to have you back. We're so excited to talk about this because we're hooked on Immaculate Grid.
That's great to hear. Thanks for having me.
It's been fun, I guess for the people that have never seen Immaculate Grid or heard of Immaculate Grid, the fastest description I can basically give you is it's basically baseball Sudoku in a way. That's sort of the quickest, idea of it. But I mean, Sean, just for people that have maybe never heard of it, you want to just to kind of quickly describe what it is for people?
Sure. Yeah, as you described, it's a 3x3 grid, similar to Sudoku, and it's the idea being that we have categories on the columns and the rows, and then you have to find a player who matches both of those categories. And so the simplest form is it's two teams. Find all the players, or list a single player who played for both the Yankees and Red Sox. So obviously, like Babe Ruth would work for that, but then also like Mike Stanley would work for that, or random middle reliever from the 1970s would work for that. So there's, it kind of cuts across a lot of different ideas of fandom and knowledge about sports and that. And the idea is to get as many players filled in for the 9 spots as you can in 9 guesses. And so we've added a little twist there where the more we track how rare particular answers are and give you a rarity score at the end. But yeah, that's basically the long and short of it.
I have to say the rarity score is definitely what makes it fun because today one of the columns was Mets and Astros, and Justin Verlander was like 40. So I think he was like an absurd number of percent because everybody can immediately think that he played for both of them. So it's fun to actually have to try and work a little bit to be like, okay, wait, who aren't the obvious guys for some of these answers?
And
Yeah,
Octavio Dotel is not the answer to everything, although it seems like it is sometimes.
very close. He is a bit of a cheat code. Yeah, I think I got Dwight Gooden for like 0.3% or something like that, which was not one that apparently that people think of very much.
Or dead, and I had Danny Heap, right? Who you have to be a Met fan to know, and he was, I think, Nolan Ryan's 4,000th or 5,000th strikeout, as well as having played for the Astros before he came there. So yeah, the Mets made it easy. I did really well today, the best I think I've ever done. But Josh Reddick surprised me that he showed up, as high as he did. He had an 18% rarity score, and I thought, who the heck knows Josh Reddick?
Yeah. It's interesting to see how it plays out. It's not always intuitive, depending on like when you came to baseball. Things that you may think are obvious are not obvious to the general audience. So it's been interesting in that regard as well.
We were actually talking about that, and I think you said it best that basically being older in this actually gives you a huge advantage because especially with the rarity score, sometimes knowing just like, oh yeah, this guy played for 2 teams, and you actually made a really good point earlier when we were talking, Dad, that thinking about expansion teams coming in their first year is a really good way to nab guys because you had to come from some other team to do that.
Right. Right. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and right, knowing Richie Ashburn was an original Met in 1962, a Hall of Famer, and probably was an All-Star. I didn't look it up. I just figured, well, he probably was the only guy that got, for a 40-win team, and sure enough, that's right. So that's kind of the fun part of it. And I wanted to ask you, so somebody named Brian Minter, who we don't know, I guess, came up with this, and it all happened really fast, at least in the backstories I'm reading, Sean. Maybe you could talk about that because it was like in April that he came up with it, and here we are, and we're going.
Yeah, he developed the game in April, and then it kind of just trotted along for a month where it was getting maybe 10, 15 people a day playing it, like his friends and family sort of thing. And then I think somebody shared it on Reddit, I think in early May. And from there, it's been just a steady climb to where it's at now. So he approached us right in the middle of June, early to mid June. And I think, I think it had just shown up on our Slack around that time. People were saying, hey, this is cool. We should, you should try this and that. And I kind of, if you remember last year, Wordle was kind of the hot thing.
Sure.
And it's kind of, it has part, has similar dynamics to that. And so, there were a number of Wordle type sports games that I never was a big fan of, but playing this, I immediately saw like, this is really addictive. It feels like it should be trivially easy to do, but it's actually challenging in certain cases to come up with players. Sometimes there are only 40, 50 players who match. And so figuring out who one of those guys is and including them. And so I felt it was a really good fit. So he reached out to us because we have all the sports, not just baseball, and he was interested in moving into other sports. And so we came to an agreement pretty quickly. It took us like 2.5 weeks to have an agreement, and then took us about another week and a half to 2 weeks to kind of convert everything over to our infrastructure. And so that was kind of the initial process. And so, yeah, July 11th, we relaunched it on, Sports Reference, as a sports reference service, tied it into some of our pages and things like that. Added things like all possible answers, after you've answered and things like that, so you can kind of double check what you're doing. So, yeah, it moved pretty quickly, and then from there, we've in the past 2 week and a half, we've launched NFL and then NBA yesterday, and hopefully NHL tomorrow.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Yeah. And I saw that, I guess people been floating out. I don't know if it was Adam floating out, college sports or something like that, because,
Yeah, I think what that would be part of kind of the NBA and NFL, right? Should pick a Minnesota Viking who played for Michigan, something like that, or a Philadelphia Eagle who played for Alabama. That's probably the most likely way to do that. Obviously,
Right.
there's not a lot of movement. I mean, there's more player movement now in college, but historically that hasn't been something that.
Transfer
So,
list Immaculate Grid seems like
yeah,
it might be a bit narrow of a column to go into.
yeah, so I think adding that, even adding, you could add like an NBA player who's born in Europe or something like that, right? For Milwaukee Buck, you could put Giannis in there or somebody else. So it's we're looking at other ways to take it, other directions. Right now we're just kind of, we've got a lot of combinations we can still use, so we're not running out of combinations at the moment.
I mean, that was actually some of the stuff we're looking at, because it's really popular. I mean, I think already got like over 100,000 people have played today, and that was
Right.
just last time I looked at the stats, so it's probably much more since then. But so is there any plans, like, because I noticed when we were looking at the basketball ones today, one of the columns was, I think, average 10 rebounds in a season.
Right.
And right now it seems like the baseball one mostly sticks to like players and like award combinations. Are there any, at least from what I've seen, is there any
Yeah.
plans to do like some more, especially because you've got access to the StatHead API, things
Yeah.
like game-winning home runs or consecutive strikeouts or complete game shutouts?
I mean those are possible. I would say. Yeah, no hitters. I could see doing something like that. Obviously, yeah. You want to as long as it's interesting. I mean, I think 3,000 hits was a couple. I know I've seen that recently. 400 home runs.
Yep.
40 home runs in a season, stuff like
200
that.
hit seasons, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that was yesterday, maybe. So 100 RBIs. So we are sprinkling in a few of those. I think that we're continuing to have editorial discussions internally about like directions to go in and things like that. So kind of one of the beauties of it is we're getting like dozens of suggestions every day. So I'm sure there are many towns in there that we can utilize.
We'll have one for you. I promise we have one. Well, because it's all built on the database, right? And that's sort of the, I would say brilliance, but the idea how it works so well together, right? You've got it built on this foundation of data. So when I was talking with Gordon, I thought, what about doing movies? You do it with IMDb, and you have two actors, and you have to come up with the movie that they were in, or the Academy Awards. It can be the same, and people will go crazy for that kind of stuff if they're into this.
Right. Yeah. I am almost a little shocked we haven't seen some things like that. I know there were some people already had launched basketball and hockey and that, so it's clear the appeal of it, and I've been amazed at how, I know Brian as well has been amazed at how quickly it's grown and the degree to which it's gotten traction.
I think
Go
I
ahead,
was
go
gonna
ahead.
say, I think the hardest part for me, at least when I'm playing it, is keeping myself honest and not having baseball reference open in another tab or browser while I'm playing it, because you're just like, well, I just want to check and be sure, because like I got burned today when I put Eric Chavez as an A's All-Star, because I guess I'm like, he was a really good player for them for those years. He had to have gotten in one, and he didn't.
He never made the All-Star game as
Mm.
an A? Really?
No. I was shocked. I was like, he had to have at least one year. No.
Right, as well. So yeah, it's I think there should be a rule that you can use any website that you created. Yeah, I've been shot down so far on that one. So
Well, and I think, so one of the things that we talked about that you could do, and you've probably talked about this, is you could put timing on it. Right. So
right.
you could have a counter, and then okay, well then how fast can you whip around and look at information? So I've gone now with the introduction of basketball and football, which both of which I'm not very good at. I'm okay, but way worse than baseball. I do the baseball one clean, and the other ones I'll use some help. Right.
No, I understand. I generally tend to think if I can come up with the player on my own and then confirm, that they fit, maybe a second go around, that's how I do it. So I know some people play multiple times and will do it clean the first time and then maybe, try and jog their memory a little bit for the second
Yeah,
go around.
that's what I wish. Is like I know there's like the one recorded run per day, but I wish you could just like hit a randomize button and play as much as you wanted.
Hey, we get that a lot. I think some of the appeal is sharing grids and like seeing how I answered this differently from how you answered it. So we're resisting that so far, but we may do. I think are talking a lot about archives and like allowing you to go back and play previous days and things like that. So that might be a kind of a compromise solution there.
Have you talked about doing anything like a leaderboard or taking a bunch of low rarity scores and inviting those people into a tournament of champions or something like that?
I know Saber has actually talked about like doing like kind of reworking parts of their trivia contest around this, and so it's very premature to discuss. But
Mhm.
I think there's been some discussions around that, so I don't know. Yeah, I feel like Jessica Brand maybe would have would have it'd be like a high stakes poker game almost for a match.
I was
So
gonna say kind of like with GeoGuessr, and people have to record their GeoGuessr runs just to prove they're doing it legit.
right, exactly,
One
exactly.
of the things I noticed is, so you have your franchises in there, and it wasn't intuitive to me as much if I saw the let's a team that I moved the A's, right? And I think a lot of times you have the Oakland A's, but we all know they're the Kansas City A's and the Philadelphia A's, and so it works, right? If I go back and I put in Chuck Klein or whoever, Grover Cleveland Alexander, right,
Yeah.
Jimmy Fox, right? So, but it's not intuitive. It would be nice to sort of let people know that if you're going back in the archives, it's okay to use those old A's.
Yeah, we're really well. Yeah, it's yeah. That's also become a more significant challenge with the football and basketball because there are some very screwy cases for handling franchise histories in there. So, for
Yes.
example, the Charlotte Hornets moved to New Orleans, were the New Orleans Hornets for a number of years, switched to the Pelicans, and for a long time that was their history. Then the Charlotte Bobcats were formed. History had stayed the same for the Hornets. And then when all those name changes happened, they all of a sudden retroactively took the history of the Charlotte Hornets and attached it to the Charlotte Bobcats, now the Hornets. So which makes absolutely no sense.
No, I
So
didn't realize that. Wow.
I can imagine how confusing that gets.
yeah, the Cleveland Browns moved to the Ravens, moved to Baltimore.
Hmm.
They their history and then gave it to the new Cleveland Browns, which was essentially an expansion franchise. So yeah, I mean we abide by those kind of stupid decisions, and I assume when the Sonics come back in basketball, they'll probably take away Oklahoma City's Sonics history and reattach it to the new Sonics, and we'll have to adjust for that. So it's
That that was immediately where my mind went to. Was like, oh yeah, then you've got like the Thunder and the Sonics. Is that treated as like one continuous franchise or two separate franchises?
right. We treat it as one franchise because all the players moved and coaches and all that. But it's not. I mean, I think I'm pretty confident that they'll retroactively strip the Thunder of the Sonics history and then reattach it.
Oh, it's not linear. It's wrong.
It's Trust me, these are the things that keep me up at night as a sports statistics.
The whole idea is that the Nationals were the Expos, and the idea of tying those franchises together is what makes you a baseball fan, and that you know stuff like that. Not that this incarnation of the Rangers was the second incarnation of the Washington Senators, who are now
Right.
in Minnesota.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if they ever form a new Montreal team. They'll try and create,
A legacy.
try to attach the Expos to them, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. So.
Well, the Expos came out of Expo 67, so that's going to be a real stretch for them to be able to go back and find a reason to use that name again. Um, I know the subscriptions obviously for StatCast, but so much of what's on baseball, all the sports reference sites is free, obviously, for people to go in and use, which is great. You guys have done an amazing job of not plastering the thing like a minor league baseball park with advertising all over it. But this new effort is going to be supported by some advertising, which we're all for. And I already see there's sort of little peek ups from the bottom. You'll get a little push and stuff like that. I just want you to know that we're okay with that. Like, it's okay for you guys to make some money doing this, as long as it doesn't look like the outfield fence in a minor league ballpark.
Because I appreciate that. We definitely don't, we don't want to kill the golden goose here. And so it's doing really well, sending a lot of traffic to our existing site, to our previous sites. And so we're pretty happy with where it's at right now. I think we could, we're introducing people to our StatHead tools as well through that. And so we're hoping to add a few subscriptions because of that. So it's all in all, we're pretty happy with where we're at.
And I think it's such a good way because, one of the things we always talk about is sort of trying to introduce people to the history of baseball. And I think that's something that this is really good for, because when you look at it, we were talking about it as like, can anybody get a rarity score of lower than 1, where you get less than a 0.1% in every column? And like, you could only do that if you really knew baseball history and probably looked some things up, let's be honest. But I mean, just because, like you were saying, with all these franchises and knowing that, oh yeah, this one guy played for both of these incarnations of this team can be a huge advantage. And I just think that's really cool as somebody that loves all these different sports.
Yeah, well, that's sort of, we're definitely seeing that as an advantage of it. And I think some of the articles written about it have pointed out it's like the journeyman player. This is kind of a way of elevating the journeyman players ahead of the star players who maybe only play, like a Derek Jeter who only played for the Yankees, or Cal Ripken who only played for the Orioles. And so it's a way of it's a way of bringing some recognition and some interest into the journey. One of the funniest things I've seen is players on Twitter, like Mike Cameron actually like used himself in the grid and like posted it. Then like 3 other like major leaguers responded immediately in the Twitter thread and stuff. Like Gregson, Swindell, and I mean just a kind of a group of guys I remember from when I was younger, and it's just kind of neat to see the degree to which the players enjoy it and like it and are following along with it as well.
Yeah, that I just read the article. I think it was Wade Miley just talking about Mike Jacobs, who I remember Mike Jacobs when he was a supposed power hitter for the Mets, which it didn't last too long. He goes, I played with that dude, and I played with him, and I know he played that. I know the answer to that. I just think that's
Oh
so great
wow,
that
yeah.
you've reached to that level.
Now I'm thinking like, oh, with the Mets and the Marlins today, you could have had Piazza because of the 1 week he spent in Miami.
Piazza for mine.
Yeah. So I think it's cool that at the major league level, and I think one of the guys admitted going, you think we'd be good at this, but not necessarily, unless you played with a guy someplace and you knew, that he was there. He might know he was there for a week or there for a day or something like
Well,
that.
I think that's the thing, is that it's so easy to remember a guy that might have played for the Astros and the Marlins, or the Marlins, but it's really hard to remember the guy that did both. I could name tons of guys that played for either franchise, but it's like, oh, what guy was on both teams? That's when it gets tricky.
I think it actually kind of plays into how the memory works as well. I'm not sure your brain is necessarily good at doing like ands, right? It has to be A and B. It could be, like you said, A or B. So I don't know. I haven't had a neuroscientist look at this, but I kind of wonder if there might be something to that as well. Because I agree. I feel like that's one of the subtle, difficult things about it.
And I have this cross sport dream grid. The problem is it only ends up being about 9 people, like Dave DeBuscher, Brian Jordan, Deion Sanders, Bo Jackson. You have to sort of, know the sport. But unfortunately, it's like one day and then it's all over.
Yeah, yeah, that would be a tough one. And well, you'd also have like 3 people for each franchise, right? So I don't know if there are enough for that might be not
It
even
might just
three
be
people.
one grid with one set of
Right,
answers.
right. It's like I
Too.
said, it was a dream. It was a dream. So, well, I think we covered pretty much what we wanted to cover, and I think this is cool. You can tell that we're really into it, and we're thinking about ways of making it better. And I know you guys are. I like how you're going slow because this initial like panacea of everybody doing it and it gets really exciting, and then people tire because that's what happens. So we don't want to give them too much, leave them a little bit hungry, and introduce a few other things. And so I like the measured way you're doing this. I think it has baseball would seemingly have an unending ability to do this, particularly if you start adding other categories. So we're looking forward to seeing what you guys do in terms of coming up with that stuff.
And
I
I
appreciate
think one of the really great things, especially for becoming something that become you do a little more regularly, is that because you can have the feature to have it remind you to do it the next day, and now that it's coming out at 9 a.m. every day, it can kind of just become part of your daily routine where at 9 o'clock every day, oh ding, I've got an immaculate grid I can do, and that'll just keep it in your head and become something that's just like your daily crossword puzzle. Basically, it's just a fun way to keep your brain engaged with something you love.
that's what we're hoping as well. So it's we're taking a measured approach, and our product team is thinking hard about it. So we're definitely appreciate everybody's interest in it.
Well, once again, Sean, thanks for joining us a second time. We'll ask you again. Hopefully, you'll say yes again because I think we'll always have something to talk about.
Well, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, that was great.
Fun. I mean, it's just always exciting to get to talk to Sean and discuss just, what has become a new sort of daily passion for us. Obviously, we didn't get to talk about how there's, Hall of Fame seems like an obvious candidate now, especially now that you've got all-stars on there, though. I worry there might not be enough guys for each franchise or even any for some.
I think you could probably do a grid that you could fill in with only Hall of Famers, but you'd have to be careful about which teams you put up to make sure that they had enough opportunities for people to choose from. You might not get the lowest rarity score.
Right, it might be really hard to get good rarity scores because there's only
The
so
Hall
many.
of Famer, people know them.
Oh yeah, you're gonna need. There's only so many guys too.
So, and we just speaking of the Hall of Fame, we had the induction ceremony over the weekend, and we'd be remiss because we normally kind of talk about it a little bit. Fred McGriff and Scott Rowland were enshrined. Both of them gave, and I watched them, terrific speeches. McGriff talking about how he got cut from his high school team and how he worked hard, all that stuff.
McGriff's was apparently is particularly very, very good.
And Rollins was great also. I think he talked about his dad a lot, and I guess Roland was a basketball player, and he had to decide between basketball and baseball, and he knew he was better at baseball, but he was championship basketball player, and he was a little concerned. His dad helped him, just do the best you can, and that's how he developed his dogged, work ethic. Going, just do the things you can do best. If it's rebound and play defense, and you're not a scorer, then do that. And so that's why Roland said, "I'm never going to be not prepared to play," and that's certainly the game that he brought.
I mean, I think that's such a great outlook for a player to have, and you'd love to have a teammate like that, certainly.
Right, right. So yeah, and we'll have more to talk about Hall of Fame wise, going forward because I spoke with Dave Metter and he's going to come and talk to us when they put the ballots up for next year. We already know that there's some first timers that are going to probably go right in.
Right. Well, you think there's a couple big names that are going to be coming onto the ballot next year. I think the most obvious one and probably the only guy that's a slam dunk first ballot guy, and that's Adrian Beltre.
Yeah, I
I
agree with you.
think he's pretty much one of the only a guy that's coming out right now that basically everybody knows. The only question is for some reason the Hall of Fame committee feel he's not worthy of being a first ballot guy.
Right.
And I think it's kind of hard for me to believe that wouldn't be the case given that he's a slam dunk It seems weird that you could be a slam dunk Hall of Famer but not a first ballot guy.
Here's what would be interesting about that when I think about it. So we know that third base is an underrepresented position in the Hall of Fame. And we had a third baseman going this year, and we could have a third baseman going in consecutive years, which is pretty unusual when you think
Mhm.
about the third baseman have gone. I'm trying to think of the third baseman. I guess Chipper Jones would have been the last one to go in before
We had
Roland.
there was a glut of very good third basemen in that era. So three guys getting in all from around the same time period. Although I guess Beltre just played forever.
Right, he played over 20 years, so I think that. So I think the Hall of Famers that will not make it in next year will be guys like Beltran, Joe Mauer. They're probably going to make him wait
Yeah, I
a
don't think
little bit.
if he gets in, I don't think it's as a first ballot guy. I think Helton's interesting because he was very close on this
Very
last one.
close.
I think it was like 72%. So with him only needing to creep up 3%, that seems like the kind of gap. It seems weird to me that he would be that close and then not get it this year.
And I think Billy Wagner's in that same place where he's near the end of his ballot tenure, and he's kind of gone up a little bit. But all people ever see against Billy Wagner is the 900 innings. They
Right.
like, okay, well then your
But I
choice.
feel like that sort of feels like to me the something that you can't necessarily hold against Billy Wagner because it wasn't like Billy Wagner chose when he got the pitch.
No, that's just the way they use closers at the
That's just the
time,
way they used him.
and he
Like,
has lots of other Hall of Fame stats, and all of this is predicated. So when I looked at McGriff, I do this every time, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I looked at McGriff, and who do I look at? Harold Baines. Because I have to look at Harold Baines just to see, okay, let me remind myself of what, and Baines had a terrific career, right? We can argue for a whole show about whether or not it's Hall of Fame worthy or not. He's in the Hall of Fame. That's the sort. So anything that comes after him when he's in there, you have to look at it going, well, how does it compare to look, Fred McGriff, way more than Harold Baines. Scott Rowland, way more than Harold Baines.
right.
So if that's your barometer, it's a problem.
That's a problem because then a whole lot of guys get in. If you're going to say, this is my baseline, and then you're like, oh, okay, well, like a lot of guys need to get in then.
So I just use that to remind myself of where it can go and say, okay,
Right, right, because it's so it's so tendency. We so tend to just compare against only the absolute peak. You're gonna what is Fred McGriff look like against Babe Ruth or something? Oh well, he didn't hit as many home runs as him, or even then you have at least these awkward situations where you're not really being fair to the guy just because he's not definitively an all-time best.
exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I thought I thought it was great to see the speeches, and you know what, Gordon, we're gonna have to go up there and sit there when Saturday, Sunday afternoon in the heat and watch one of these for ourselves.
We'll wait for a player we really want to hear a speech from. There'll be somebody that we know gets like maybe when Beltran gets in. We'll
Yeah,
go,
as long as he wears a Met hat, which
yeah, if he's wearing a Met hat, we'll go when the
he
next Met
might
gets
he
in.
might wear a Met hat, but they probably have to make him
Because
manager for that to happen.
unfortunately, I think David Wright, who will be on the ballot for the first time this year, he will at least get enough votes to stay on the ballot, sort of as a nod of respect to him, but there's no way he's getting the Hall of Fame nod.
Hey, Scott Rowland had 10% in his first year, and he made it. It can happen.
I just don't see Wright doesn't even have the career numbers that Roland does.
I'm agreeing with you. I don't think they. Unfortunately, injuries like with Mattingly are going to be
Right,
the
which is why I
difference.
think he'll stay on for a year, sort of as a nod to like, hey, this wasn't entirely in your control. You didn't choose to, have a career-ending injury, basically.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, well, I look forward to talking more about the baseball reference and this immaculate grid stuff because I want to see where they take it, and I still think they should do the movie thing.
Yeah, that'll be fun.